The ignorance of the oppressed is the oppressor's greatest weapon. Therefore, those who know the truth must teach. African proverb. The narrative that all lives matter is much more insidious than most people realize. Throughout history, the Caucasians have demonstrated an almost total disregard for the human lives of non-whites. After learning from the Chinese how to make gunpowder, the Caucasians weaponized it to create guns and cannons. They then used their gained weaponry advantage to make all other races their victims. Their subjugation, murder, and exploitation of all other races are unparalleled. While labeling all other races as being savages, the Caucasians' mistreatment of other racial groups has been, in fact, the most brutally savage throughout history. These statements are irrefutable facts. Clearly, all lives matter has never been the belief held by Caucasians. The narrative that all lives matters is merely a gaslighting counter-narrative designed to deflect from and to diffuse the moral stance that Black lives matters. Black people are the unknowing gaslighting victims of the white establishment. The term gaslighting psychological abuse is usually associated with individual abusive relationship wherein which one person is being manipulated and mentally abused for the benefit of the narcissistic abuser within the relationship. However, that same insidious system is also being used on a larger scale, wherein which Black people are being mentally abused for the benefit of the narcissistic white establishment. It's then called gaslighting psychological warfare. Presently, white government agents that specialize in psychiatry and propaganda works unrelentingly behind the scenes, manipulating the collective minds of the Black masses to think in ways that protect and serve the system of white supremacy. It's the hidden truth that white oppressive forces don't want Black people to ever learn. Whenever Black people engages in any kinds of massive protests, these men begin deploying gaslighting psychological warfare campaigns against the Black population. It's designed to subdue the Black protests. Within this scenario, the white establishment never legitimizes any of the grievances being presented by the Black population. They instead respond by constantly presenting counter-narratives that undermines and distracts attention away from the Black protests. The narrative that all lives matter is one of those many created gaslighting counter-narratives. The white masses merely regurgitates the all lives matter narrative and are totally clueless of its origin. The general population doesn't know what's happening, and it doesn't even know it doesn't know. The white masses are part of the blind sheep population, which the majority of us are a part of. Within this gaslighting warfare tactic, information is always twist, spun, and or selectively omitted to always favor the oppressors. This practice is continued until the Black protester begins to doubt the legitimacy of his own position and stops protesting. Many begin to doubt their reasons for protesting, thinking that if their cause isn't being recognized by the dominant society, then perhaps it lacks merit. It is an insidious form of psychological abuse that is being deployed against Black people. Case, point, and proof. Remember when former NFL player Colin Kaepernick kneeled in silent protest against the white cops routinely killing innocent unarmed Black people? And the white establishment responded by vilifying him in the media and by accusing him of being unpatriotic? Those responses by the white establishment were actually this disclosed gaslighting warfare tactic. The white establishment labeled Kaepernick and all the other Black athletes that took a knee in silent protest against the routine killing of unarmed innocent Black people as being unpatriotic and insulting the flag and also insulting our troops. This shifted the attention away from the issue of the murderous white cops and redirected it to the issue of the patriotism of the Black protesters. They then broadcast television programs discussing the issue on whether or not the athletes were being unpatriotic while totally ignoring the issue of white cops killing Black people. You watch 1 hour segment or half an hour segment, all you do is talk about whether they're patriotic, totally ignoring the true issue. To reiterate, the issue of the Black athletes lacking patriotism is merely a distraction. It's intentionally designed to divert attention away from the issue of Black victims being routinely killed by white cops. We've all witnessed firsthand how well this gaslighting warfare system works. at subduing black protests against the routine killing of unarmed black people. For the most part, look at society now. The nation has moved past the issue without the white establishment having made any concessions towards fixing the problem, and the black population haven't gained any resolution regarding the problem. This outcome has totally benefited the white society. The white establishment has done absolutely nothing whatsoever to reduce the routine killing of innocent unarmed black people by white police officers. This outcome was deliberately orchestrated by the white society's gaslighting warfare system. Within this psychological warfare system, the white establishment is never acknowledged as morally wrong, and the black oppressed are never acknowledged as morally correct. This gaslighting tactic is also what's actually being done to black people when the white establishment label us as being racist towards the white society whenever we speak out against white racism towards us. Accuse the other side of that which you are guilty of. Joseph Goebbels was the Nazi prime minister for Hitler, propaganda minister. That's what he said. You blame the other person what you're guilty of. This tactic shifts the focus away from the inequality being expressed by the black population and forces the black population to engage in defending ourselves against the false accusation of white racism. Meanwhile, the true issue of black inequality is never addressed by the white establishment. This gaslighting warfare system allows the white society to take a benign neglect position regarding all black protests. Benign neglect. Okay, this behavior of the white society is benign neglect. Benign neglect is an attitude or policy of non-interference or neglect of a situation which may have a more beneficial effect than assuming responsibility and addressing it. The white establishment has done absolutely nothing whatsoever to reduce the routine killing of innocent, unarmed black people by white police officers. Rather than doing something to reduce the problem, the white establishment has instead resorted to using distraction and stalling tactics to avoid addressing the issue. This is what's known as benign neglect. It's also a gaslighting tactic that the white society deploys against us. Our ignorance of these facts is their greatest weapon. They also deployed the gaslighting tactic known as whataboutism. Just with a sound, whataboutism. Whataboutism is a gaslighting tactic that attempts to discredit the protesters' position by charging them hypocrisy without directly refuting or disproving their argument. This is what's being done to black people whenever the white establishment says, "What about blacks that kill blacks?" in response to black protests against the routine killing of innocent unarmed black people by white police officers. Although "what about blacks that kill black" is not at all a legitimate rebuttal against white cops that have sworn an oath to uphold the law routinely killing black people. Nonetheless, it affects the morale of the black protesters. Many black protesters will begin to believe that it is a validated response. The mind is easy to manipulate when the victims are unaware of what's being done to them. This mental abusing tactic is continuing until the black protesters begin to question the merit of their own protests. Many will eventually become mentally fatigued and then give up on their protest, having gained no grounds on the issue. It's how white oppressors now handles black protests. Within this gaslighting psychological warfare system, the oppressors never acknowledges any of the grievances being expressed by the oppressed. The white establishment is never acknowledged as morally wrong, and the black oppressed are never acknowledged as being morally correct. This practice is continued until the black protesters begin to doubt their position. Many begin to doubt the reason for protesting, thinking that if their cause isn't being recognized by the dominant society, then perhaps it lacks merit. The minds of targeted population are quite easy to manipulate if they're unaware of what's being done to them. Once the mind has been confused, manipulation becomes simple. The mind will even ignore common sense, and rationality falls away, even overlooking hypocrisy and deception. This gaslighting warfare system allows white oppressors to treat all issues presented by the black protesters like a can being kicked down the road. You keep kicking down the road, never addressing it. They continue kicking the can down the road, metaphorically speaking, while never actually addressing the issue that's being presented by the black population. They continued this gaslighting tactic until black people stop protesting, become mentally fatigued. This is what happened in regard to the athlete taking a knee. This gaslighting tactic was developed in response to the unprecedented black protests demonstrated during the 1960s. In addition to assassinating our true black leaders and replacing them with black puppet leaders that actually secretly works in behalf of the white establishment, they also started applying gaslighting tactics against us. It's how they now suppress massive unified black protests. Millions of black people have been manipulated to perceive ourselves as being our own worst enemies. But the truth is, our worst enemies remain the same group of people who became our worst enemies from the first moment we encountered them. But they merely manipulated us to see things different. Their evil tactics are now deployed with much more sophistication through their psychological warfare propaganda campaigns. And those black people who don't critically think never notice their mental change. As long as we think that we are our worst enemies, we're being controlled by a slave syndrome, and Jesus is going to come and save us, we will remain the white man's mentally enslaved fools. There are tactics that are being used to maintain their white dominance. After 1960s unprecedented black protests, they studied our communities and they developed systems for subduing unified black protests as a means of maintaining white dominance. We must educate our minds, learn these systems, and then develop counter strategies against them. One love and peace, brothers and sisters.